Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to day 75. Voice is cracking. I actually named yesterday wrongly and named it day 75, but I have since learnt my lesson and corrected the name of yesterday's video. So today, day 75, Deuteronomy 14 to 16. Moses is still elaborating on the various laws that they have, eating ceremonially clean and unclean animals. He identifies which ones are clean, which ones are unclean, and highlights it to the people. Um, Again, it's interesting, right? This they associate with so in Deuteronomy 14, he's talking about a practice that sounds like it's probably something that either the Israelites used to do, or that they picked up from one of the neighboring cities, which was cutting themselves or shaving their head above their forehead in mourning for the dead, right? This seems like some sort of practice that they either picked up or did that God disapproves of. And the reason he disapproves of it is because you have been set apart as holy to the Lord your God. And I think that sort of trickles down, right? The reason that they must not eat these detestable animals is the same because they are set apart for God. Um, and the reason I highlight that is because this not necessarily being a matter of sort of eternal life or death, but rather being simply to set them apart amongst those societies amongst which they lived makes sense then that Peter would get the image that says now you can eat all things in the New Testament because at that point this form of setting them apart or this method of setting them apart was no longer necessary. They had a better means of setting them apart, which was the Holy Spirit, which was them being like Christ, which was their love for one another. um, and so Moses carries on and talks about the tithing um, they're supposed to do and to ensure that they carry on doing it. Um, and reminds them not to neglect the Levite because, again, the Levite didn't receive an allotment of land. Um, and the tithe was sort of brought in so that they would also have food. Um, they'd be catered for. Now, this Deuteronomy 15, I think, is super interesting. Relief for debtors. And this goes back to what I was saying about um, the sort of economic climate that would have been if Israel was following this to a T, right? Literally, there should be no poor among you. Right? So it's off with every 7 years you're supposed to cancel debts. And unsurprisingly, later on goes to speak on, look, if someone comes to you for a loan and it's close to the seventh year, don't just refuse it because you're close to having to release it, because God will consider that sin. And there's this sense of abundance, not necessarily just because everyone is rich, but because kindness and generosity are baked into the fabric of the society, so that in as much as there will always be poor among them, part of their command from their God is that they share freely with the poor. And what a society that would be. Same goes for the Hebrew slaves. And this really, I think, shows that the slavery that the Bible sought to control, sought to redeem, sought to evolve, is very different from the slavery that we saw in more recent past. In this, Hebrews at least were to go free at the end of 7 years. But here's the kicker: their servitude could take on such a form that in Deuteronomy 15:16 it says, suppose your servant says, I will not leave you because he loves you and your family. Which of the slaves in more recent times would fit that? Not necessarily that I want to leave you, but that I love you and your family. I want to be bonded to you forever. Yeah. Maybe there was some, or maybe there was some, but that very much was not the the nature of slavery. That this would be like a provision because it could happen so often, you know. And so it really shows that it was a very different nature. Servitude was really just paying off debts. Um, but such was the society that it could be so beneficial to the slave that they choose to remain in permanent um, association with their employer. And then we're going to talk about sacrificing the firstborn males. In Deuteronomy 16, we talk about the various festivals, which were all designed to remind the people of where God has brought them from. And interestingly, it does because it's even still celebrated today. It's morphed somewhat because, of course, the situation isn't as it was then. But they still celebrate the Passover, and we still hear of, the Passover and the Feast of the Harvest and the Festival of the Harvest and all of this. And every time they do these, they remind themselves of their ancestors thousands and thousands of years ago that God did something for. And I can't help but imagine even now they still think, or they still, anticipate that God can do such things for them. It's important to remember these things. And again, the nature of the society is such that there are judges and officials, but there is no police force. They somehow, would police themselves, and they were commanded to never twist justice or show partiality, but rather to be fair and just in all their actions. So that's today's 3 chapters. I'm going to run off, but let's see what's in store for tomorrow. January 17 to 20. So, God willing,